Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Grey's Anatomy Season 2, Episode 10, Much Too Much. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of what happens within this episode. So, as always, we will first start with the patients of the episode. So, the first patient was a rather rude man who came in with his assistant, as he doesn't have family or friends, and it is discovered that he has a tumor which is causing him to be constantly thirsty and drink a lot of fluids. However, for his surgery, that will make his sodium too low, so they have to stop him from drinking and are hydrating him through an IV instead. And his assistant is given the task of making sure he doesn't drink any water, which ends up getting him fired because this patient believes that if his assistant has seen him in his weakened state, that he is no longer going to respect him and therefore felt the need to fire him. And he gets so desperate for water that he ends up drinking out of a toilet bowl, which was a sight. And then once he's drank the water, they have to try to bring his sodium levels back up to where they had been. And so Alex gives a quick order on the medication to the nurse. However, then he's paged 911 later, and it is revealed that he gave the wrong prescription to the nurse, which ends up with him being scolded by Derek. We have then a one-night stand of Meredith's from the night before coming into the hospital, not realizing that she worked there, with his erection will not dissipate, will not go down, and it does end up being that he does have a tumor which is causing it. So then Derek is called in and operates on the tumor, and that of course becomes awkward for him and Meredith, as this is the first time that he's aware of how Meredith is moving on, and he comments on it being more painful than he expected. But of course, he made his choice. We then get our main patient of the episode, which is a mother of quintuplets who has them inside of her stomach still, and they're trying to delay the birth as much as possible so that they're as mature as possible within the womb. And there are several of the quintuplets that do require surgical intervention. One has an issue with their heart, so Burke's called in. One has an issue with fluid buildup in the brain, which is why Derek's called in. And then one has their organs outside, growing in a sac outside their body, which is why Bailey is called in. And it gets to Izzy is the one who's mostly taking care of the mother while she's hooked up to all the machines, and as always gets attached to the patient after some initial judging her for keeping all 5 babies instead of reducing the number artificially. And the mother then introduces her to all of the children, which she's already named, and that gets Izzy on her side, who's there throughout. And of course, when then she goes into labor, they have to take the babies out, and all of the babies are taken out, put into the surgeon who's going to take care of them's care, and then wheeled out of the OR at the end of the episode. And we are left on a cliffhanger as we don't get any conclusion to what happens to the children afterwards in this episode. On to the more dramatic romance side of things, we have Christina and Burke who go to his place, and it's her first time at his place. And then when she wakes up in the morning, he's already gone to the hospital, and he's left a key for her and a note inside of the coffee mug, basically saying that he had the key made for her. She at first is very hesitant about this, and she goes to him at work and is like, what's this key for? Why are you giving it to me? And he basically says that, like he's taking all the steps but if he takes many more, then they're going to end up not being together because he needs her to also take steps. She ultimately decides to take a step, and she uses the key to his house while he's there, and he confirms that it is a step, and then she basically says they don't know enough about each other when he asks her to move in with him, and she takes him to her place where it is revealed that she is a complete and total slob. And then they are physically intimate before getting paged to the quintuplet surgery. We then, of course, have Meredith, who it is implied at the start of the episode has had a series of one-night stands with multiple people. And then her current one comes back to haunt her by arriving at the hospital with the erection that won't go down, which ends up being a tumor, which means Derek finds out about the fact that she has moved on to at least be intimate with other people, and she tells him, of course, that that was inevitable. It was like it would have had to happen eventually, and he comments on it being a surprise to him how much it hurts. But again, he made his choice, so he doesn't really have much right to comment beyond that. Alex and Izzy, they come home together and are try to be physically intimate, but then the next morning Izzy comments to George how there were technical difficulties and Alex was not able to perform. She worries that it may have been her, but he doesn't want to talk about it. Eventually, they do try again in the hospital, but again, he's not able to, and she starts to really think it was her. We then have him and the nurse that was helping him with his patient kind of having a heart-to-heart talk about, how she didn't mean to get him in trouble with Derek, but Derek had to know that he had given the wrong order, and they talk about how they're having difficult times recently, and then they end up actually being able to be intimate, which, of course, when Alex ignores his pager going off because he's being intimate with the nurse, Izzy walks in, sees them together, and that's right at the end of the episode, so we don't know what the fallout to that will be yet. And then the last couple that we have is Addison and Derek, and it is confirmed at the start of this episode that they were intimate, as they had been planning the previous episode. And she says it's amazing, and Derek just kind of looks awkward and disappointed and doesn't really say much back, obviously hinting that he's maybe not as enthusiastic about it as she is. And the main reason that the quintuplet case is the main case of this episode is because it's also noted that Addison has signed her contract to become an official employee at the hospital going forward and have her own service as an attending. So now that we've been reminded about what happened within the episode, it's now time to rank the episode. As always, we'll be ranking on our mostly objective ranking list, which uses set ranking values to determine the score of the episode, and then the personal ranking list, which is just my personal take and opinion on the episode. So for the mostly objective rank values, I've highlighted those I felt applied to this episode. And first, we have 1 point for our single episode character introduction, which is Dory, who is the mother of the quintuplets. Because most of this episode revolved around her as a patient, she did play a larger role than most patients do, which is why I have decided to give her 1 point for a character introduction. We then have the supporting relationship development, which is Addison and Derek being able to become physically intimate, which they hadn't been, and at the end of the last episode was implied to be there, and that is worth 2 points. We then have our multi-season supporting character development, which is Addison officially signing her contract to be an employee of the hospital, and that one is worth 3 points. And then we have 4 points for our main relationship development, which is, of course, Burke giving the key to Christina and having it made for her in the first place, and the suggestion that their relationship has progressed to the point where he would like her to move in with him. And I don't think she's given an official answer by the end of the episode, though she does take him to her place so that he can see what a slob she is, so he kind of has an idea of what he's getting into if he does in fact want them to move in together, and that is worth the 4 points. Which brings us to 10 points overall. However, there is also negative for this episode, and that is to do with the supporting relationship regression or breakup. First, not worth points, but I'm going to honorably mention how disappointed Derek looked after his intimacy with Addison, as that does point to troubles and things not being as correct as she feels they are because she thinks it was amazing. He's obviously not as enthusiastic. But it's so minor and it doesn't really impact the episode in any other way, so I'm not giving it points, but I am going to honorably mention that it happened to be the case. And then the actual supporting relationship regression or breakup is that Alex has technical difficulties when being intimate with Izzy, and yet is perfectly fine cheating with the nurse that he gave syphilis to that had temporarily dated George previously. He basically is going back to her, and he doesn't seem to have a problem performing there. And that obviously cheating is disgusting behavior. That's going to be a regression in the relationship. I don't believe Izzy is the type who is going to tolerate it. So I also feel that a breakup is imminent. And of course, being a rewatcher, while I don't remember the specifics of exactly when they break up, I know that they aren't endgame at all. So probably this is the first. We're over the hill of happiness and heading down into the pit of despair of the relationship, where they will most likely be breaking up very shortly, maybe in the next episode or one shortly after that, but it is incoming. And that's -2, leaves us with 8 out of 10 for this episode. So our mostly objective season 2 rankings so far. In first, we have Make Me Lose Control, Into You Like a Train, Deny, 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 Thanks for the Memories, Enough is Enough, Something to Talk About, Let It Be, Much Too Much, Bring the Pain, and in last place so far, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. So for my personal ranking of this episode, I have mixed feelings. Obviously, this is a personal ranking, so it is based on my personal view of the episode. I am not a person who really thinks highly of one night stands. I think very poorly of people who do one night stands. I believe in relationships and committed long-term relationships and eventually finding that one person to commit to. That's my personal view. So, obviously, one night stands, not something I personally approve of, but at the same time, I completely acknowledge that other people do. And so, while I'm not a fan of it, I'm not going to say that it completely ruins the whole experience or anything that dramatic or extreme. Obviously, having said what I just said, also probably could tell not a person who has any tolerance at all for cheating. I think if you're going to make a commitment to somebody, if you have both mutually agreed to that commitment and exclusivity, then cheating, zero tolerance. It should never happen. None, and honestly, I do not believe in making a mistake for cheating because there's too many steps involved from point A to point B in cheating for it to be an accident and not have an intention behind it. I mean, you have to meet, you have to flirt, you have to go to a secondary location, you have to take your clothes off, you have to actually commit the act. It's a lot of steps. There's a lot of points where you can say nope, nope, nope. And if you choose intentionally not to say no on any of those steps, it's not an accident. It's not, you could say, I guess it's a mistake, like that you feel regret for it. But fact is, it's a choice you made, and therefore you have to deal with the consequences of that. And at least for me, that would be zero tolerance. Never going to have anything to do with you again. So, I hate cheating. I think it is one of the worst things you can do to somebody emotionally. And if you happen to have a disease, then also physically to somebody. So, overall, really hated those aspects of the episode, particularly the cheating. Absolutely disgusting. And we had just started to like Alex and feel like he was starting to be redeemed from the a-hole that we met at the start of the series. And now he's gone and ruined it all. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, he does, as this is a rewatch, he does come back yet again, but he comes back in a way like I don't mind you as a character, but definitely does not come back in a I would not feel sorry for anybody you had a love interest with because obviously you don't respect your relationships, so you're a terrible partner. Anywho, that being said, not a fan of those aspects of the relationship. The one customer that is Alex is, well, not customer, patient, that is Alex's patient, pretty forgettable. He is an a-hole, and that is memorable. He drank out of a toilet bowl, that was funny, but ultimately a pretty forgettable character and situation when but that's fair because it wasn't really the focus of the episode. You know, there was Meredith's one night stand coming back to haunt her, and that whole thing where everybody in the hospital has to know that, oop, Meredith had a one night stand, broke a man's penis, oops. And then Derek, of course, finds out because he has to consult, and there's that whole embarrassment of it. But again, like, as far, like, it's there for plot purposes. I understand the plot purposes it's there for, but ultimately, there wasn't a lot of focus on it outside of just embarrassing Meredith, and it didn't really have much oomph or impact, but there was nothing overly negative about it either. And then we had our main patient, which is the quintuplets, and this one too. I mean, I grew up in the era of TLC putting in all the multiples families on TV, so I don't have necessarily the same impression that Izzy had when she found out that this woman was pregnant with 5 babies, because I'm like, I've watched TV shows. Well, actually, I didn't really watch them, to be honest, but I saw all the advertisements and commercials while watching other shows on that channel that were about all of the families raising extreme multiples. And so I was like, well, that's just something that may happen with fertility treatments. And if the doctors feel that they can do so safely, I do not see a problem with allowing all of the children the opportunity to try to live, to fight for the right to life, rather than being like, I'm just going to randomly choose 2 of you to get rid of and let the other 3 grow larger. I'm like, that wouldn't sit well with me, because how do you make that choice? As a parent, how would you make that choice, especially when you know nothing about them yet? You could have gotten rid of the 2 best children that ever existed and be left with 3 spoiled brats. You never know. So I do think the mother in this case made the right choice in allowing all of them to grow. Of course, some of them did end up with health defects, and the surgical team is going to be working on that, but we didn't get any conclusion in this episode, which also didn't sit well with me. We got the surgery of them all being removed and then everything wheeled out, and nothing from there. So we don't know the fate of the children or not. Now, I did cheat and look up to refresh my memory, and I do see that this patient, Dory, is a 2 episode character, which I thought she was only in this episode. It wasn't labeled part 1 and part 2. Like, the 2 episodes have different titles, but apparently this case at least does carry over into the next episode, it looks like. So hopefully we'll get a conclusion there. But unless it's labeled part 1 and 2 where I'm expecting it, I don't necessarily like being left not knowing the outcome for the infants, especially since they are infants, and so it's going to hit a little closer to, like, be a little bit more, oh, what am I trying to say? It won't be as easy to not have an emotional attachment as it would be if it was an adult. That's how I'll say it. Anywho, all that being said, nothing major apart from the cheating that really stuck out as a negative, but also didn't really necessarily have the oomph that many other episodes do. There was a lot of relationship developments, but none that were like edge of your seat, keep me engaged type things. And then I get, of course, the cheating, which is, you know, recoiled back in disgust. Sort of reaction. All that to say, 6 out of 10 is what I decided to give this episode. And that brings our season 2 ranking so far on the personal ranking side to first place, Make Me Lose Control, Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head, Something to Talk About, Into You Like a Train, Deny, 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 Let It Be, Thanks for the Memories. This episode came in 8th, Much Too Much, and then Enough is Enough, and in last place, Bring the Pain. So now we come to our series ranking so far, which is where we're going to be ranking each of the seasons against each other. So far, we've completed season 1, and on our mostly objective ranking, that ended with a score of 77.78%. And so far for season 2, we have 80 points out of a possible 270. On the personal ranking side, season 1 ended with 66.67%. And season 2 so far has a score of 76 out of 270. With that, we've now rewatched and ranked Grey's Anatomy season 2 episode 10, Much Too Much. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.